It began with a message that wasn't meant to matter, a simple hello sent across a screen lit by midnight between two people who knew each other only as names, as pixels, as voices in a digital crowd. But there was something in the rhythm of the replies, a warmth hidden between words that felt different. Each conversation stretched longer than the last, threading through sleepless hours until morning blurred the edges of the night. What started as harmless curiosity became habit. Every notification stirred something beneath the ribs, quiet but certain. The hum of a phone at 2 a.m. felt like proof that someone somewhere was awake for the same reason. Typing bubbles became the pulse of connection. The screen wasn't just glass anymore. It was a window into the version of life that felt lighter, truer, less afraid to be seen. There were no filters, no practiced smiles, only sentences that found honesty faster than real voices ever could. He wrote with humor that melted hesitation, with patience that waited through silences instead of fearing them. The conversations wandered from trivial to profound, from favorite songs to childhood ghosts. Trust grew not through proximity, but through persistence. It was dangerous and beautiful, the way a heart could begin to open without ever seeing a face. The distance made imagination a companion. Each message built an image, the way laughter might sound in a room instead of in text, the way eyes might linger after a joke. There was no photograph that could carry what was forming. It lived in tone, in timing, in the invisible weight of care. Nights became longer because good. Bye always arrived too soon. Sleep well never felt like an ending. It was another promise to return. The first call changed the texture of everything. Voices brought the words to life, filling them with breath and imperfection. Every pause felt like a heartbeat, every laugh an echo that lingered even after the line went quiet. The voice on the other end didn't sound like a stranger. It sounded like something remembered. From then on, silence between calls became a kind of ache, gentle, constant, familiar. The bond grew in the quiet spaces, in the waiting between messages, in the comfort of knowing that someone was always there, even if unseen. There was safety in being known from the inside out. No gestures, no appearances, only truth. The heart learned to trust what it couldn't touch. It was fragile, yes, but it was real. Over time, reality began to knock softly. Plans formed, cautious and excited. Meeting in person wasn't about curiosity anymore. It was about confirming what already felt certain. The night before, the world felt both enormous and small. There was fear, not of disappointment, but of the depth already reached. Because what if it was exactly as it felt? What then? The morning arrived wrapped in nervous energy. The city looked brighter than usual, colors sharper, air thicker. The moment eyes met, everything stilled. The face was familiar, not because of photos, but because every piece of it matched the person already known in the mind. The smile carried recognition deeper than memory. When hands finally met, they didn't shake, they settled, as if they had always belonged that way. There was no need for grand declarations. The truth lived quietly in gestures, the shared coffee, the lingering glance, the calm in the silence. Love didn't burst, it unfolded. Every word spoken aloud felt like rewriting what had been typed months before, only now it had weight, warmth, breath. Connection before touch had been the seed. The meeting only gave it sunlight. And in that light, it grew, not into something new, but into something finally whole. Sometimes love doesn't begin with sight or touch. It begins with a voice carried through wires, with words that mean more than they should, with trust built between sentences. And when the distance finally disappears, the heart already knows the way. The station was louder than memory had prepared for. Voices, footsteps, the low metallic hum of trains moving somewhere far beyond sight. Time blurred at the edges. The heart wasn't keeping pace with it anymore. It was moving on its own rhythm, somewhere between hope and fear. The phone buzzed once, "I'm here." The screen glowed against trembling fingers, and for a second it felt like every word ever exchanged had led to this single line. Then came the moment. A crowd shifted, and there he was standing still while everything else moved. No filter, no pixels, no distance, just him. The air thinned, like it was making room for something fragile. Breath caught between a laugh and a gasp, and the rest of the world softened to background noise. He looked up, eyes finding the face that had only existed through screens and words, and the expression that crossed his face was something between recognition and relief. A smile began slow, as if unsure it had permission, then widened until it filled the space between. The steps taken toward each other felt both impossibly long and far too short. Each one carried months of late, night confessions, every shared silence, every moment of waiting. When arms finally wrapped around each other, the noise around them collapsed into quiet. It wasn't a dramatic embrace. It was steady, certain, the kind of hug that happens when two pieces of something broken realize they still fit. There was warmth that didn't ask for explanation. The body relaxed in a way that only happens when it finds what it has been looking for without knowing it was searching. No camera could have captured it. The tremble of relief, the scent of rain and skin and closeness, the way hearts seemed to adjust their timing until they beat together. It wasn't perfect, just honest. Nervous laughter slipped out, soft and unsure, but even that felt right. His voice sounded lower than on calls, warmer, real enough to shake the ground a little. They began to walk without deciding to, moving toward the exit and into a world that suddenly seemed quieter. Words came in small bursts, scattered between shy smiles and glances that lingered too long. Everything ordinary, traffic lights, coffee shops, sunlight through windows, felt new, like a story being rewritten with real ink. Over coffee, the distance between chairs was an illusion. Hands rested on the table, almost touching, neither pulling away. Conversation was the same as always, yet completely different. Familiar jokes landed deeper now, every laugh echoing with the knowledge of all the nights that had built this moment. There were pauses, but they weren't awkward anymore. They were full alive with everything that didn't need to be spoken. Later, they walked along the river, side by side, their reflections trailing close behind. He told a story already heard 100 times before, and yet it felt new in his voice, carried by breath instead of text. The rhythm of footsteps on pavement matched something unspoken. Each step was a small promise to keep walking, no matter what came next. When he reached for a hand, it wasn't sudden. It was inevitable. The touch was gentle, fingers brushing first, testing, before settling into certainty. The contact sent a quiet tremor through everything, not because it was electric, but because it was true. It was the same trust that had grown between words now finding shape in skin. A soft rain began, hesitant, the kind that only wants to listen. They didn't run for cover. Drops clung to hair and clothes, and laughter rose easily, unplanned. It wasn't cinematic or perfect. It was human. The kind of moment that doesn't need witnesses because it already feels like enough. Evening crept in slowly, painting the city in gold and shadow. When goodbye hovered at the edge of the night, neither wanted to say it. The hours had stretched and folded into something timeless. "I'll text you when I get home," he said quietly, though both knew it wouldn't be just that. The next message would mean more. It always had. Before parting, he reached forward and tucked a loose strand of hair behind an ear, fingers lingering for a heartbeat. The gesture said what words couldn't. "I know you. I see you. I'm not leaving this behind." Walking away didn't feel like leaving. It felt like carrying something newly born, but already familiar. The city lights blurred through a haze of quiet joy and disbelief. The echo of his laughter, the warmth of his hands, stayed long after the crowd swallowed the space between. It wasn't a meeting, it was a remembering, two lives that had brushed across wires and waves, now standing in the same air, breathing the same rhythm. Love had simply crossed the distance, and in that first look it found a home. That night began in stillness. The city outside murmured in distant sounds. Cars wind fragments of laughter carried through the dark, but inside everything was quiet. The table between them held a single candle, its flame bending with every breath. Shadows moved across walls like soft waves, and the space between them felt alive. The air held the kind of tension that wasn't sharp but tender, like something fragile being unfolded for the first time. Every word spoken that night came slower, lower, each one chosen carefully. Laughter found its way between sentences, nervous but genuine, the kind that comes when there's nothing left to hide. The room was small, but it felt infinite. Each glance carried history, months of waiting, of wondering, of knowing and not knowing. When hands brushed, the world didn't spin faster, it steadied. The simplest contact said everything. We are here and we are real. They talked until words blurred into quiet. The candle burned lower. He reached across the table, his fingers finding a hand that met him halfway. There was no surprise, no hesitation, only the peace of something meant to happen finally arriving. It wasn't about the moment itself, but about everything it carried. Trust, gratitude, 1,000 unspoken promises folded into a single breath. He smiled, not with certainty but with awe, as though realizing that what they'd built from miles apart had somehow survived the distance and the doubt. The touch deepened, not to claim but to reassure. Every movement felt like learning how to speak again, gently, fluently, without fear. Silence grew thicker, warmer. It wasn't empty, it was full, of hearts adjusting to the rhythm they'd always shared, of thoughts dissolving into presence. The room smelled faintly of wax and rain. Time softened its edges, letting everything unfold as slowly as it needed to. There was no rush, no script, no performance. Just two people remembering what it feels like to be understood completely. Every look said finally, every heartbeat agreed. When the candle flickered down to its last inch, they sat close enough to see themselves reflected in each other's eyes. The flame's light danced there for a while before surrendering. Even in the dark, the glow remained. Love didn't arrive like a storm that night. It bloomed quietly, honestly, wholly in its simplicity. Morning entered quietly, the kind of light that doesn't wake you, just lets you notice it's there. The world outside was moving already, cars starting, voices rising somewhere beyond the glass. But inside, everything remained suspended in that soft after, space between night and day. The warmth in the room didn't come from the sun. It came from something steadier, something that had found its rhythm during the dark hours. He was sitting by the window, shoulders wrapped in light, tracing patterns on the mug between his hands. The air smelled like coffee and candle wax, like something both new and familiar. There was peace in watching him, the quiet certainty of someone who didn't need to fill silence to belong in it. When he turned, the look on his face carried a calm I hadn't seen before, like every unanswered question from the months behind us had finally found a home. Words came slowly that morning, not because there was nothing to say, but because everything had already been said in smaller ways, in glances, in the space where our hands met, in the easy laughter that now replaced the messages once sent through a screen. It felt strange at first, not reaching for a phone, not watching for the blinking light of a new message. His voice was here now. His warmth wasn't pixels or punctuation. It was presence. There was something grounding in the ordinariness of it all. The clatter of spoons, the faint hum of the city beyond the curtains, the way sunlight caught dust in the air and made it look golden. This wasn't a fairy tale morning. It was real, and in that reality, love felt deeper. Not because it was flawless, but because it was alive. They walked later, down streets that didn't need to know their story. The same city that had been background noise for countless late night calls now stretched around them, familiar but changed. Every step together carried the rhythm of shared time. The world didn't celebrate them, It simply made space for them, and that was enough. Conversations that had once taken hours to type now happened with a look, a laugh, a brush of fingers. The simplicity of being near, of seeing expressions instead of imagining them, turned everything ordinary into something almost sacred. There were moments when words still stumbled, when silence crept in like a small uncertainty, but even that felt natural. Love didn't erase hesitation, it made room for it. Later that day, sitting on a park bench, he said something about how strange it felt to finally exist in the same frame of reality. There was wonder in his tone, the quiet kind that doesn't need answers. The memory of all the nights spent apart, talking until exhaustion blurred sentences, waiting for replies that came with time zones between, made this simplicity almost unreal. Yet it was the most real thing either had ever known. There was laughter, too, unguarded and full, the kind that draws stares but doesn't care. It came easily, spilling out of the months of careful restraint. For so long, they'd lived in sentences, emojis, ellipses. Now laughter was their language, unedited, alive. Warmth had replaced Wi-Fi. The evening came with the same slow gentleness as the morning. The sun slipped lower, painting long shadows on the pavement. They didn't talk about tomorrow or the next week, or the plans they might one day make. The present felt too precious to divide. He reached over, fingertips brushing against the bracelet still worn from that first meeting, the one that had become a symbol of connection before touch. It caught the light, glimmering faintly like a secret between them. It wasn't dramatic, the way love lived in that moment. There were no grand gestures, no cinematic lines. Just quiet understanding, shared breath, and the kind of peace that comes when both people stop reaching for proof because they already feel it. The world around them continued, people passing, conversations humming, the sky fading, but their silence was full enough to drown everything else. When night arrived again, it carried no edge of waiting, no ache of distance, just a soft repetition of something known. A lamp glowed near the bed, its light wrapping them both in calm. Words came small and sleepy, memories of first messages, the laughter that followed typos, the confessions that had taken courage and time. Each story felt new again, now that it could be told face to face. As the last words faded, a kind of quiet gratitude settled in, gratitude for every moment that hadn't worked out before, every delay, every missed chance that had made this timing possible. Love looked different offline, but it felt exactly the same. Maybe even better, because now it had weight and warmth and the promise of tomorrow. The phone on the table stayed silent. It didn't need to glow to mean connection anymore. The person who once sent messages that said good night was now here, breathing the same air, within reach. And that small, ordinary miracle, that transformation of distance into closeness, of words into life, was enough to make the world feel new again. Sometimes love doesn't arrive through grand entrances. It begins quietly, behind screens, in laughter typed out past midnight. And sometimes, if it's true enough, it finds its way into the light, still as gentle, still as honest, but finally real. If this story reached a quiet place inside you, stay. There's more hearts learning trust, more moments where words become touch. Like, share, and subscribe not for algorithms, but for love itself, because somewhere another story is waiting to find you.